In my last video, that is not a prerequisite to watch this one, we talked about the Primordial One and the Heavenly Principles, and I explained why I've always thought them to be two different entities. But of course, if we talk about the Primordial One, then we just need to also talk about the Four Shades, which are among the most important entities of Teyvat. The problem is that it feels like we both know too little and a lot about them at the same time, which makes no sense, but what can we do? We will first talk about each shade in order to then figure out what the shades really are, and then conclude the video with a theory about let's say, pseudo-shade. Also, I do recommend you watch my previous video because there's a theory on the Shade's rebellion against the Heavenly Principles that I won't cover in this one, but also because it's an interesting video in general. Anyway, it's time to start the video, but first, this is a theory video and leaks are prohibited in the comment section. I will use information available in the game, but my theories and conclusions are not to be considered the official lore of the game, unless I got something right and it's confirmed in a later update of the game itself. Well then, gather your shining shades and let's get this video started. Let's start with Ronova, the only shade we've officially met, although we perfectly know that's not true. She is the ruler of death, and she appeared as a set of eerie red eyes in the sky that curiously look very similar to the ones on the statue of the omnipresent god in Inazuma. We don't know if Ronova is the omnipresent god, but considering the original name is Statue of the Thousand-Armed Hundred-Eyed God, and that Ronova takes the form of a lot of eyes in the sky to look down on Teyvat to ensure her rule is enforced, it kinda seems fitting. I mean, A wanted to stop Inazuma from ever changing because she had lost her sister and her friends, and she also gave up on her body, locking herself into the plane of euthymia to relieve the memories of the past without creating new ones in order to prevent erosion, which is the form of natural death specific for long-lived beings like the gods. So we could think she was making offerings to Ronova with the statue so that she would stop death, stagnating Inazuma in her twisted version of eternity. Anyway, when Natlan's ley lines were completely destroyed in a war between the dragons and the angels, Ronova helped the last standing angel, Xiuhcoatl, in the creation of an alternative but independent version of the ley lines, the Night Kingdom, a place where the souls of the people could go to after death to then be reborn as new people, which is what the regular ley lines and Irminsul primarily do. Ronova's domain is death, so it makes sense that she can create something that deals with the souls of the dead. Millennia later, Xbalanque died when he defeated Xiuhcoatl and Ronova made another appearance. Xbalanque negotiated, or better yet forced, Ronova to write new rules into the Night Kingdom, among which the Ode of Resurrection that allowed the warriors of Natlan who died fighting and defeating the Abyss to come back to life, an essential rule that gave Natlan a chance at stopping the invasion of the Abyss, but that also goes against Renova's rule of death. Xbalanque also convinced her to share a part of her powers so that in the future someone could use them to put a definitive end to the Abyss invasion, but at the cost of their own life. By doing so, Ronova defied the Heavenly Principles, she overstepped her authority as a shade, and was harshly reprimanded to the point that she stopped caring about everything. She didn't even care that the humans were addressing her by her given name anymore, something that apparently the shades forbid. Now, why she appeared in front of Xbalanque is still unknown, but I still think he was the third Descender, considering the fact that Fate never foresaw his sudden appearance nor could predict his actions, and this would explain why such a high being like a Shade would even bother talking to a human, agree to his demands, and above all defy the Heavenly Principles. I've talked about Xbalanque being the third Descender in a few videos, the most recent one being the one about the Tolan quest, so if you're interested, the link is in the description. Moving on, around 3000 years later, Mawika used the power Xbalanque borrowed from Ronova, so she made yet another appearance to collect the death that she was owed, but Capitano, quote-unquote, forced her into causing a paradox by taking his life without lifting the curse of Caria that prevents him from dying, a paradox that could break the whole world. The next shade we're gonna talk about is Istaroth. She is the ruler of time, also known as the Thousand Winds of Time, Tokoyo Okami, but above all, Kairos, names that the people of Enkanomiya picked for her since, like we said before, the shades cannot be addressed with their given names. We've never met her in person, or at least that's what we know, but she made a few appearances throughout history. We don't know what she looks like, but being the ruler of time, she's being depicted as a clock surrounded by wind, you know, 1,000 winds of time, on one of the murals in Salvindagnir, the first ever traces of her, although we don't know what she even did back then. Once we got to Enkanomiya instead, we learned that she descended into this forsaken place to give Aberaku knowledge to build an artificial sun to defend against the bishops. This means that she knew where the people of Enkanomiya ended up in, but despite that, the seal that kept them underground was never removed. The people had to wait for it to lose power, which happened during the Archon War, when Istaroth made 2 more appearances. First, she created Barbados, a wind sprite born from the branches of time, who, with the help of the people of Mondstadt, defeated the Caribbean, becoming the Anemo Archon. And then she also saved the people of Enkanomiya. After having been defeated by both Morax and the Raiden twins, Orabashi fled into the Dark Sea and accidentally fell into Enkanomiya. There, he accidentally read Before Sun and Moon, finding out the true history of Teyvat, something the Heavenly Principles had been trying to hide from the world. Because of that, Orabashi and the entire population of Enkanomiya, who witnessed this section of history in first person, were sentenced to death by the heavens. Orabashi decided to take all the blame of this transgression on himself in order to save the people of Enkanomiya, but the problem was still there. They still knew something that shouldn't be known, and this is when Istaroth appeared. She extracted the memories of the people of Enkanomiya, condensing them into what was later known as Sin Shades, that were then sealed into Enkanomiya so that no one could learn about that forbidden truth. The people, now completely oblivious of the past, were allowed to live on the surface, and after they settled down on Watatsumi Island, Orabashi led an expedition to Yashiori Island, but the true secret purpose was to oppose the Raiden twins so that A could, unknowingly, deliver the death sentence. To find Istaroth's last known appearance, we need to fast forward to the Cataclysm, when Makoto made a deal with her so that 500 years later, A would be allowed to travel 500 years in the past, giving her a chance to plant the sacred sakura tree that would have saved Inazuma, changing the entire timeline since originally Inazuma was fated to be completely destroyed by the Abyss. Now, I do have a theory that we've actually somehow met Istaroth, and that we've known her since the beginning of the game. Think about it. She created Barbados when the people prayed to her to receive help against the Caribbean's tyranny, but after the Archon War ended, Barbados cut off a huge chunk of the nation, sending it far into the ocean, and suddenly people completely forgot about her. Now, most of that piece of land became the Golden Apple Archipelago, but one nameless island remained close to Mondstadt. When we reached this island in the world quest Time and Wind, we found a sundial that looks like Istaroth's representation of a clock, but also a ragged notebook that told us that both this island and the Thousand Winds Temple had something to do with a god of time, and that this god had a connection to the Anemo Archon, who suspiciously enough goes to sleep for centuries for no apparent reason. All of this has always made me think that Istaroth hid herself inside Venti's body, and when one is asleep, the other takes control. The next shade is Naberius, the ruler of life. We don't really know much about Naberius, we don't even know if it's a female or a male entity to be fair, although this is Genshin Impact and the other 3 shades are women, so... Anyway, we've basically known her name since version 1.2 when Albedo was released, and we read about the Heart of Naberius, the Rhine daughter found in a domain. But for years, all we knew about this name was that it had to be something like a god, since this is a name from the Ars Goetia. It wasn't until version 5.6, when Albedo told us that Naberius was ruler of life in the most casual way, as if we were talking about a random and important person like any other, that we finally learned who this entity actually was. The first hint about her existence, though, was given to us once again in Before Sun and Moon, when the Primordial One created the world, helped by one of its shade who created the animals and the humans, so life. Then we got another hint in Fontaine in the description of the Wings of Merciful Wrathful Waters, in which we read about the leader upon whose shoulders lay the duty to create life, the entity that created Egeria, the artificial water dragon that would have substituted the dead original water dragon sovereign as the heart of the Primordial Sea in order to, again, create life. The next hint can be found in Finale of the Deep Galleries, when the first angel gave the people of Hyperborea the power of creation that the Heavenly Principles once used, with which they created the Fae, and this makes me think that by that time, Naberius had already been reduced to a heart instead of a fully living entity. Maybe she displeased the Heavenly Principles even worse than Ronova did, and was harshly punished, reason why she was turned into a heart. Then, as we said before, Ryandaughtr found her heart in a domain, probably where the first angel used to live underneath Hyperborea, and only recently did Ryandaughtr finally decide to devour it, merging with the ruler of life. Interestingly, although Naberius became a heart and could be defined as dead, she's still a special entity, so death is just a temporary state. So with Ryandaughtr and Naberius merged as one, things are definitely gonna be weird, because Ryandaughtr can now wield both a power that can shatter the world and a power that can create life, two contradicting powers in one insane, beyond crazy scientist whose goal in life is the pursuit of a form of perfection, the creation of a primordial human. The last shade is quite literally the first entity we've ever seen when we started playing Genshin Impact, the sustainer of the Heavenly Principles, aka Susty. Now, the first four artifacts clearly refer to the four shades. The Flower of Life refers to the Shade of Life. The Plume of Death, which by the way looks like the ancient names Ronova basically created, refers to the Shade of Death. The Scents of Aeon, that in Chinese are called Scents of Time, refers to the Ruler of Time, which leaves the Goblet of Eonothem, which in Chinese is called Cup of Space or Cup of Void, and with Susty looking like Yana as the Herrscher of the Void from Honkai Impact, the last shade should be the Ruler of Void, meant as powers over space dimension, not the abyss from the Void realm. Susty's name instead is a whole different problem. Officially, we don't know her name, it has never been mentioned, she's only ever been defined as the Unknown God, but the name she had been given during the beta version was obviously leaked, and most of us couldn't avoid it, although since then the devs could have also picked a different one for her. Don't worry, I won't say what it was, leaks are prohibited in the comment section but also in the video itself because I hate leaks. If we use logic to deduce her potential name instead, and we check the list of the demons from the Ars Goetia, Naberius is the 24th demon, Ronova is the 27th, and Istaroth is the 29th, which means that the distance between the names decreases by 1 each time. As a consequence, since Susty's name can't be the 21st demon, Morax, it might be the 30th, Forneus, and just so you know, this is not the name from the beta version. Apart from that, there's another interesting theory that will probably anger a few of you. As we said before, Istaroth was called Kairos by the people of Enkanomiya, and in Before Sun and Moon we also read another interesting Greek name, Phanes. Many of you are 200% certain that Phanes is the Primordial One's name, but I've never understood this certainty, especially when the people of Enkanomiya themselves couldn't tell the Primordial One and Phanes apart. They weren't sure who was it that they saw. And this is ignoring the fact that the devs definitely didn't drop the name of the creator of Teyvat just like that. If we instead carefully read Before Sun and Moon, we will realize that the Primordial One created the four shades, and while it was still fighting the Sovereigns, Phanes used the eggshell from which it was born to separate the universe from the microcosm of the world. This means that the Primordial One can't be Fanes. It can't be doing two things in two different places at the same time. Otherwise, what did it even create the shades for? Now, Fanes separated the universe from the microcosm of the world, where Teyvat was eventually created only after the Primordial One defeated the dragons, which means that Fanes can manipulate space just like Yana as the Herrscher of the Void. As an obvious consequence, Fanes is simply the Shade of the Void. But Fanes is an androgynous being with wings and a crown, which is completely different from what Susty looks like. That's what you were thinking, right? Yes, but that was Fanes' description millennia ago. Ronova now looks like eyes in the sky, and Naberius became a heart, so it's clear that their appearances may have changed across the millennia. Now that we've talked about each shade separately, the most important question is, who are the shades? We've been told that the Primordial One created 4 shades of itself, which means they're basically copies of the Primordial One, and the fact that each of them has a specific power most likely means that the Primordial One split its own power in 4 and gave it to them so that together they could do what it could have done by itself, had it not been fighting the Dragon Sovereigns. After the creation of the world, the Shades became the guides of Teyvat. They lived inside the world and they gave the humans everything they needed, but above all they became the unbreakable laws of Teyvat. These laws can obviously be broken, but the consequences can put the whole world in danger. But what does it mean that the Shades are the laws of Teyvat? Well, this is the complicated part that we need to understand. The Shades themselves don't actively perform anything related to their rules. I mean, Naberius doesn't bring babies like the stork, Ronova is not a Shinigami, Istaroth doesn't move time forward, and Susty doesn't create new dimensions. What the Shades actually do is to ensure that these rules exist by just existing themselves. People will always be born, people will always die, time will always move forward, and Teyvat will always be separated from the rest of the universe. Of course, there are exceptions, and it seems that they come with a great price. Ronova did create the Ode of Resurrection, a rule that goes against her own domain of death. She did bring Xbalanque back to life herself, but as Xiuhcoatl said, he paid the price for his death delayed, and I think the price was his body, the only thing that, despite the deal he made with Ronova, couldn't come back when Mawika defeated the Abyss, only his soul was available. Ronova also lent her power to the Pyro Archon, and even then the price to pay was the user's death. Istaroth instead made a deal with both Makoto so that A could go back in time, which is against her rules since time can only move forward, and with Orobashi to strip the people of Enkanomiya of their memories of the past, and in both cases it really sounds like the price both gods paid to have a Shade use her power to save their people was their own lives. Furthermore, Makoto was also allowed to come back just once more when A used Istaroth's power, which is very similar to Xbalanque's deal with Ronova. We don't really have proof that the other 2 Shades also did something that goes against their own rules, but you know, Susty caught the twins, which is clearly a manipulation of space, and then she released them back into Teyvat, something she probably shouldn't have done, while Naberius definitely did something so bad that she was reduced to a somewhat dead heart. To conclude the video, if the Shades are represented by the first 4 artifacts, what about the last one? The Circlet of Logos, known in Chinese as the Crown of Reason, really seems to be like a problem because obviously the Shades are just 4, but in my last video I explained how the Primordial One and the second who came are the same kind of entity and that they are most likely based on the Gnostic myth of the Aeon Sophia. When Sophia Syzygy, her male counterpart, the Aeon Theletos, came to the imperfect world that she accidentally created, he brought Gnosis, spiritual knowledge, to the imperfect humans to grant them a chance at redemption. In Genshin Impact, a Gnosis is a higher version of the Visions, and the Visions are essentially a shard of the Archon's mastery over an element, granted to those people whose ambitions are uniquely strong. Furthermore, the Inazuman Archon quest made it beyond clear that losing a vision causes the vision holder to lose and completely forget about the ambition or desire that allowed them to receive their vision in the first place. Now, while Sophia is the Aeon of Wisdom, and curiously enough, the one thing that keeps the whole world alive, Irminsul, is ruled by the God of Wisdom, its own avatar, Theletos instead is the Aeon of Desire. He represents a longing for something. A very strong desire that defines one's whole life is basically their ambition, and a strong ambition in Genshin Impact grants a person a vision, which then turns a person into an allogene, someone who can potentially become a god, which is actually the base concept behind Genshin Impact, since Genshin in Japanese or Yuanshan in Chinese is what was translated in English as allogene, so the whole game is based on the impact of one allogene or of the allogenes in general on the world. Now, in my last video, I said that Theletos is the second who came, that he is the true savior of Teyvat, and that since he is the same kind of being as the Primordial One, Sophia, he created a sort of shade of himself that was sent, or descended, into Teyvat, the Heavenly Principles, the first descender who changed the world as it saw fit, but also created the Gnosis and allowed the people to receive the visions. Allow me a quick digression before the end. The Heavenly Principles are actually just one entity. Nahida called them
the entity that changed your fate.
And then she also said,
the Heavenly Principles has been quiet since the Conria disaster 500 years ago.
While the dragons, talking about Xiuhcoatl, said its master. Despite being just one entity, I'm pretty sure they are split in three, just like Under's daughter, the goddess of fate in Simulanka, was represented by 3 statues. In mythology, there's Hecate, the goddess of the moon, usually represented as 3 beings, whose other name, Trivia, can be found on one of the murals on Tsurumi Island, who for the reflected, meaning fake, light is the moon, and we know that there's a winged one ruling over the radiance of the moons. The most similar myth, though, is that of the Moirai, the representations of fate, who are counted as one entity despite actually being 3. To conclude this digression, in the remake of my Visions video, I said that the Archon's ideals represent the 7 heavenly virtues, and almost 2 years later, now that we know that the Heavenly Principles created the elements that the Archons oversee, this makes even more sense. The heavenly virtues are split into 2 groups. The cardinal virtues, so prudence, Dendro, justice, Hydro, temperance, Pyro, and fortitude, Geo, and I think these represent the 4 shades, while the other 3 are the theological virtues, you know, what we can easily define as heavenly principles. So hope, Animo, charity, Cryo, and faith, Electro. And what a coincidence with this last one, since
only through eternity are you closest to the heavenly principles.
Anyway, to conclude the video, the Crown of Reason most likely refers to the enthroned ruler of Teyvat, the Heavenly Principles, who, like the 2 entities that Theletos sent into the imperfect world in the Gnostic myth, gave the people spiritual knowledge, that is, reason, to save them from their imperfections and sins. And that's it, I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and if you're interested in Genshin Impact Theory videos, consider subscribing. If everything went smooth with the editing of this video, the 5.7 livestream aired today, so obviously I'm definitely already working on an analysis video. I don't know what they talked about, but Skirk is in there, so there's more than enough to know that I'll make a video about it. Well then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, over and out.